Well, good day, everybody. This is Chris back again with the Ancient Scholar. This is going to be video 4 in a series of videos talking about receptors and maybe looking at the bigger picture of receptors. And now what I want to do is I want to talk about the branches, or I'm just going to review the branches of the what we call the peripheral nervous system. So if we start, let's just start, and I'm going to try to see if I can do this. So imagine, if you will, that this is the brain here, and of course the brain, the spinal cord. So I have the brain, and I have the spinal cord here. And the brain and the spinal cord is what we collectively will call the central nervous system, or the CNS. Okay, that's the central nervous system. And then the nerves that are away from the central nervous system, we call the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so I have the brain and spinal cord, the central, and then the peripheral. Now the central controls the peripheral, okay, but the peripheral nervous system are all the nerves that are away from the brain and the spinal cord. Now, within the peripheral nervous system, I have two different branches there. I have what's known as and I think I'm just going to draw it here. I'm going to draw it in green, okay? So I have a branch here, okay, called the somatic. Okay, the somatic branch of the peripheral nervous system. And the somatic nervous system, and soma literally means body. And if you remember talking about neurons, the body of the neuron is what we call the soma. And that just literally means talking about the body. And what the somatic nervous system does is it controls skeletal muscle. Okay, so skeletal muscle. Okay, and we sometimes call this the voluntary. Okay, the voluntary, because we do have some conscious voluntary control of the somatic nervous system. Sometimes we don't. That's not a generality I can make, but in some situations I do have direct control. Now, I can decide to pick something up, or to run, or to walk, or what have you. So I have some conscious decision making that goes into the somatic nervous system. Now, the other major branch of the peripheral nervous system is something called the autonomic. The autonomic. The autonomic nervous system. I just think of autonomic as being automatic. And that is to say that the autonomic nervous system is not, in most cases at least, you don't have a whole lot of conscious control over it, and it's really subconsciously controlled by the central nervous system. Now, and I do have some limited conscious control. If I decide to get maybe I'm having a stressful day, and I decide that I'll let that stress overwhelm me, I can have some, my heart rate will increase, and so I do have some very limited ability to affect the autonomic nervous system, but for the most part it is pretty much automatic. Now, I have two branches of the autonomic nervous system, okay? And I'm going to draw the first branch here in orange. All right. There we go. I'm going to draw the first branch in orange. And then maybe let's just pick a totally different color, maybe like a light blue here. And I'll draw the second branch in the light blue color here. Okay. The first branch that I'm going to talk about is what we call the parasympathetic sympathetic, the parasympathetic nervous system, and then this light blue is what I'm going to call the sympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system. Okay? And these little guys over here, these little balls, this little area here, in both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic have them, these are what we call ganglia. Okay, because ganglia is just plural. Ganglion would be singular. And a ganglia, what a ganglion is a ganglion's kind of like an exit ramp. If you imagine the central nervous system, I'm driving a car on the interstate, and the spinal cord's like the interstate. If I want to take an exit off the interstate, you know, I need to get on the exit, and then the exit takes me to a side road that gets me into the city. Well, the ganglion, or a ganglion, is nothing more than an exit, a way of exiting the central nervous system and going into the autonomic. And the ganglion is basically what we call a synapse. A synapse. So here I have the nerve that comes off the spinal cord, and a synapse is just a junction. That nerve ends, and then a new nerve begins, and then a neurotransmitter is released from this nerve that goes to the nerve in the peripheral nervous system, activates it, and then that signal propagates through. The somatic nervous system is kind of interesting in that it may not have a ganglion, or it may not have ganglia. That you can actually have a nerve that originates in the brain itself, and it may go all the way out to the skeletal muscle without ever really going through an exit. It's just kind of a straight shot. The autonomic nervous system does not work that way, however, and you have to take an exit ramp off of the central nervous system to get on to the autonomic. And you can either take the parasympathetic or the sympathetic, depending on what's going on. Okay, so that's all that the ganglion or ganglia are. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system, as you well know, is kind of the part of the autonomic or peripheral nervous system that what we call the feed and breed kind of response. The feed and breed. So, you know, we expect this to decrease our heart rate, help us digest, increase secretions, things of that nature, decrease our blood pressure. The sympathetic nervous system is what we call the fight or flight. Okay, the fight or flight kind of response. And this is where you increase your heart rate, you increase your glucose, your blood pressure increases, you have blood that's shunted from the periphery into the core of the body, and so on and so forth. Okay, these are two very different physiological responses. And some people like to say that these two fight each other for control of the body. That's not really the case. In real life, it's a balance of both parasympathetic and sympathetic, and at any given time, both branches are going to be working at the same time. But, you know, if I'm out riding my mountain bike, clearly the sympathetic nervous system is going to be dominating because that's what I need it the most. But I'm still going to have some parasympathetic activity, and then likewise, you know, if I eat a big old meal and I lay down and take a nap because I get a little post-parental letdown, I'm a little tired, and I'm going to work on digesting that big old gut bomb that I threw down my gullet. You know, clearly the parasympathetic nervous system is that action is going to be stronger. And, you know, at any given time, really, it's a balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic input. So they're not really fighting each other. They're complementing each other. Okay, so there we have that. So now what I want to do is I really want to talk about the receptors, and I'm going to focus on the autonomic, okay? So we're going to kind of zoom in on the autonomic nervous system, and let's go ahead and talk about receptors for the sympathetic first. All right. So when I talk about receptors, I'm going to talk about postganglionic receptors. Okay, the ganglionic receptor will always be the same, but the postganglionic receptors are a little different. So I'm going to start there, and then I'll come back and tell you what's going on here. But the postganglionic receptors, the big ones, there are actually more than this. We're going to focus, again, kind of big picture here. The big ones really fall into three different types of receptors, or what we call the alpha receptors. So there's my alpha. Specifically the alpha 1 receptors, okay? The beta 1 receptors and the beta 2 receptors, okay? These are the three big receptors that are relevant in the sympathetic nervous system. And we know that our alpha receptors are primarily located in, or they're located in other places, and of course they're located within the central nervous system as well. But the alpha 1 receptors that we're really focusing on are be located in blood vessels. And if a alpha 1 receptor is activated, it is going to cause vasoconstriction. The blood vessels are going to constrict, and of course that can lead to shunting of blood, increased blood pressure, and so on. The beta 1 receptors that we're primarily concerned about are going to be located in the heart. Okay, and this is what, if these get activated, the heart rate's going to increase, the contractility will increase, and conductivity will be more efficient, and so on. And then the beta 2 receptors that we look at are located in the lungs and in the uterus as well. So it's smooth muscles in the lungs and uterus. And we know that activation of beta 2 receptors can cause bronchodilation, can cause relaxation of the uterus. And I just kind of remember the saying, you have one heart and two lungs. So you got the beta 1s are primarily in the heart, and the beta 2s are primarily in the lungs. Just don't forget the uterus as well. Okay, so that's what activation of these receptors, these are the kind of the physiological effects. Okay, that's the sympathetic nervous system. Now, when we talk about the parasympathetic, okay, parasympathetic nervous system, I am going to have two different types of receptors there. There's what we call the nicotinic and the muscarinic. The nicotinic and the muscarinic receptors. And then I have subtypes of nicotinic and muscarinic, but I'm going to kind of keep it broad here, and we're just going to talk about nicotinic and muscarinic. A nicotinic receptor, I think of nicotinic receptors as kind of more or less being more concentrated in muscle. Okay, more concentrated in muscles, skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and particularly the heart as well, but muscles. Okay. And then the muscarinic receptors, I kind of think are kind of located within organs and also certain glands. Okay, so if I activate a nicotinic receptor, I might have expect like a decrease in my heart rate. If I activate a nicotinic receptor, I may have muscles contracting as well. If I have a muscarinic receptor that's activated, I might expect, I think of just like sticky, nasty stuff. I expect secretions, increased gastric secretions. I might expect my increased peristalsis perhaps occurring, and increased secretions in the GI tract, and increased secretions of goblet cells and mucus in the lungs. So I kind of get, watery, yucky, nasty stuff going on there. Okay, so that is parasympathetic and sympathetic. The different broad classes of receptors and just the broad physiological effects associated with those receptors being acted upon or being agonized, not antagonized, but agonized in this case. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there. As always, thanks for hanging in there.